The other side of the fence, we have another group or another family of peptides that are called bioregulator peptides. And these are infinitesimally small. So these are 2 to 4 amino acids in length. They're the tiniest little sequences. They actually don't just interact with receptors on the outside of cells. What they do is they get into the cell, they get into the nucleus, and they bind to DNA. So they actually affect your genetic expression. So they're epigenetic switches, if you will. Now, there are peptides on the other side of the fence, right? So we have 2 sides of the fence. We have the bigger, longer chain peptides that can be up to 50 amino acids in length. And then we have the other side of the fence where these little teeny tiny little diminutive peptides are these epigenetic switches. On the other side, BPC157, there's another one called GHK. There's other peptides that can affect gene expression. It's not their only mechanism of action, but they don't have that privileged entry, if you will, into the nucleus to actually directly bind to DNA and affect the proteins that are generated. And so for the audience right now, they're like, oh God, I don't even know what she's talking about and why do I care?
So let's take it.
Let me back up a little bit.
A step back. So the bioregulators, and there's the bioregulators, and then there's the longer peptides, and then there's the even longer peptides. Am I saying that right?
No, I mean, there's either peptides or bioregulator peptides.
Okay.
So
once again, if you could recap the bioregulators, the smaller ones.
For sure. So the bioregulators were discovered in Russia about 30 to 40 years ago now, probably 35 years ago, by a young, at the time, a young officer who was a medical doctor and researcher in the Russian army. And he was tasked with figuring out how do we restore health and vitality to our cosmonauts that are going up in space and being exposed to massive radiation, and to our submarine people, the submarine navy, if you will, who are in these nuclear submarines, which at that time were really poorly insulated. And so they were effectively being exposed to radiation. And so, the brass came to this young guy who clearly was a promising dude and an impressive person and said, look, here's the deal. You have a blank check. You have all the lab animals you need. When it comes time to doing human research, we've got factory loads of people over there. You just figure out the problem. And so, without taking everybody through a long, tortuous journey, he discovered these tiny little proteins that actually occur in virtually every single life form that he looked at. And so they are naturally occurring in food even. Right? So there's sequences, and the way that the body, or the way that Mother Nature structures proteins, we're made up of all different proteins. Our hormones are proteins, our enzymes are proteins, our muscles made up of protein. Like, we are protein, cornucopia here. Is that within the protein, there's going to be certain segments that remain intact even when that protein gets broken down. And those bioregulator peptides are those segments. In the literature, Cavinson describes how there's specific cleavage sites on either end of the 2, 3, or 4 amino acid sequence that allows that sequence to remain intact, which is taken up through the lumen, so through the stomach, into circulation, and they then have an affinity for whatever tissue or organ or gland they come from to affect the DNA there. So today, if somebody was to look at using bioregulator peptides, and I'll tell people a little bit about how and why they're used, you would have 2 categories. You would have the natural bioregulators, which are in capsules. They're nutritional supplements. These are extracts from the tissues, glands, and organs of young animals that are raised under very strict circumstances, and they're put into a capsule. And what happens is, in that capsule, you get that amino acid sequence we talked about, but you also get a bunch of other amino acids and proteins. So you kind of get the entourage, if you will, that will affect the change. There are 21 bioregulators that are commercially available in natural form. And each one corresponds. There's 2 different ones that correspond. So one is to the brain, just to finish that sentence as I keep interrupting myself. So we have a pineal gland bioregulator, which many people may have heard of as epitalon. there's the central nervous system bioregulator, and then you have bioregulators. I'm not going to name them all for you guys here, but you have you have a bioregulator for the thyroid gland, the thymus gland, the adrenal gland, the pancreas, the stomach, the liver. The liver bioregulator might actually be very helpful to someone like you. There's a blood vessel bioregulator. There's one for the heart. There's one for cartilage. So, there's testes and ovaries and kidneys. So you get the sense that every one of the major systems and organs has some bioregulators affiliated with them. And so the way the bioregulators are used is to either as a preventative measure to help induce cellular rejuvenation in each one of those organs. So if you can imagine, as we age, things start to wear out a little bit, they get a little fatigued. So if we use the bioregulators maybe a couple of times a year strategically, we might be able to initiate rejuvenation and restoration of function, if you will, in those tissues, glands, and organs. Therapeutically, they can also be used as part of a holistic program, if you will, to address things like a thyroid that's not pulling its weight, or adrenal glands that are under a lot of stress. Or if somebody's circadian rhythm is very disrupted, if they're working with a coach and they're doing all the things to help to restore circadian rhythm, they could use the pineal gland bioregulator that helps with circadian rhythm. It also helps to normalize melatonin production. And it also helps to activate telomerase, which is an enzyme that maintains telomeres on the ends of your DNA. So you get the idea with the bioregulators that you could strategically kind of use them over time in a way to, if you will, restore the tread on your tires.
That makes sense. And it's so funny because everyone's got a long journey before 2025, right? So yeah. I would say that my rock bottom was 15 years ago, possibly. My mentor put me on these bioregulator peptides in these boxes that were Russian. I have no idea.
That is so cool.
So yeah. I took them. I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what they were. I just did what he told me to do. But now thinking back, that's what it was. And yeah, I noticed a difference. My focus was kidneys at the time. And I would retain a ton of water. My kidneys would be inflamed. And when I was taking them, I could see the release. And so definitely I saw a difference. So as we're talking about peptides and you're talking about amino acids, it begs the question, does it matter what a person's protein intake is, what the quality of their amino acid intake, or is it two separate things?
Yeah, I think it's two separate areas. I mean, it'll always matter. Right. Our quality of protein intake, all those things will always matter, but there's no relationship there. Okay. Right. I mean, like there really isn't a relationship. On the other, and if you want to visit the other side of the fence, we can go look at the other peptides. So one thing about the bioregulators, and you may have noticed this, is that usually they will, their effects are very subtle and over time. It's not typically I'm sure you didn't start taking the kidney bioregulator and overnight say, oh my God, I feel so much better. And he probably had you on kidney, blood vessel, a whole bunch, right? Kidney, blood vessel. You may have done a run of pineal gland because everybody throws in pineal gland. What the heck? Maybe the central nervous system one. The thymus gland, most likely, because thymus regulates immunity, and the immune system always needs a little help in balancing. So what's important to remember about the bioregulators is what they do is they modulate, they normalize function. They don't boost. Okay. So, I think that as they become more popular and more people get super excited about them and start selling them and pitching them and doing the whole 9 yards, be wary of people that tell you, oh, all you have to do is take this bioregulator. And oh my God, I heard recently that they heard someone say, oh my God, so-and-so was saying that he has friends that use the testes bioregulator and they put on so much muscle because their testosterone went so high. And I'm like, no, they didn't. If they put on muscle, they were working out, they were eating right, they were doing all the things. Maybe they were using anabolic steroids. I don't know what they were using, but I can tell. And maybe it's possible that their testosterone levels were really low. And maybe the bioregulator helped to normalize their testosterone levels. But I can promise you that what the bioregulator is not going to do is drive you into super physiologic testosterone levels so that all of a sudden you win your bodybuilding competition. So I just think it's very important for me. It's part of actually what makes them relatively safe, right? Like it's part of that is because they don't, you can use for someone with a thyroid dysfunction, whether they're hypo or hyperthyroid, you can use that thyroid bioregulator and it's going to try to normalize it.
Right.
You're not going to solve all your thyroid problems just with the bioregulator. But what I've seen is it can be the last piece of the puzzle. When people are doing everything, they're doing with the iodine, they're getting, they're managing the antibodies, they're doing all the things they need to do to support thyroid. They bring in the bioregulator and all of a sudden things just start to fall into place. So we do see that.
That's what health is about. It's not just the magic pill. I always laugh. My dad is waiting for the magic pill. I'm like, Dad, there's not
a long time.
Yeah. You got to do all the things. And if you're not sleeping, none of this matters. If you're totally stressed out, none of this matters.